Hello and most welcome to 801, the very first trembling breaths on the new century 800. Everyone most welcome, and we will today take one of those parallel comparisons between Wittgenstein and another area. I've been looking for quantum physics. I haven't found it. I found Zen. Zen is a bit close to the third option of Graham Priest, his specific logic. And see if this can stir up some thinking. The author is John B. Canfield, and it's a very old paper. It's from 1990, I think, something like that. And I just get to it. Wittgenstein and Zen by John B. Canfield. Avoiding thought, all appears. Chusetsu, 9th century. Wittgenstein's later philosophy and the doctrines of Mahayana Buddhism, integral to Zen, coincide in a fundamental aspect. For Wittgenstein's language has, one might say, a mystical base. And this base is exactly the Buddhist ideal of acting with the mind empty of thought. My aim is to establish and explore this phenomenon. The result should be both a deeper understanding of Wittgenstein and the removal of a philosophical objection to Zen that has troubled some people. Part 1 below begins by bringing into focus a contradiction between a ubiquitous common sense doctrine on the one hand and Zen and Wittgenstein on the other, and presents the Zen Wittgensteinian views on this issue. The dispute concerns the question of whether understanding requires thought. For both Wittgenstein and Zen, language and understanding do not require thought. For Wittgenstein, rather, language and understanding are grounded in what he calls practice. Wittgenstein's idea of practice overlaps with the Zen idea of what shall be called here just doing something. That is, doing something with a free mind of ideas or concepts. Part 2 presents an overview of Wittgenstein's view of language. This is done by a presentation of his central conception, that of a language game. The point here is to show how central features of language games are founded in and develop out of just doing. In this way, a view of language and hence of understanding, of grasping a concept, and so on, that is consonant with the Zen worldview is sketched out. Part 3 is concerned with certain mystical aspects of the Wittgensteinian and Zen views developed earlier. Chapter 1. A fundamental dispute. Just doing and practice. We cannot see the world, the picture. We cannot see the world because we think about it. Metaphysical pictures or beliefs distort the perception of reality. One such metaphysical picture, a pervasive and powerful one, concerns the relation between thought and language. It has been given expression as follows. Whereas both thought and words have meaning, just as both the sun and the moon send light to us, the meaning of the words is related to the meaning of the thoughts, just as the light of the moon is related to that of the sun. Extinguish the living things, and the noises and marks wouldn't shine anymore. But if you extinguish the noises and marks, people still think about things, but not so well, of course. The picture presented here is linked to the following views. When we speak, we express our thoughts. The words we speak in and of themselves are lifeless, mere disturbances in the air, like sounds produced by rain or wind. When we hear and understand, we, as it were, translate the lifeless words into thought. Thus, a man expresses his thoughts to another via the medium of words. The words form a bridge between his thoughts and the others. The mere noises of speech gain life, meaning, because they are related in this way to thought. This picture or theory will be offered and defended by virtually everyone prompted for the first time to think about and express his views on the matter. This is a remarkable fact. It shows that the view is natural, comparable to the equal natural metaphysical view man has of himself as a discrete, enduring entity or self. In some way, it seems we are compelled to think that words express thoughts. Not surprisingly, then the view shows up also in intellectual disciplines such as psychology, that are still veined with philosophy. The footnote is so interesting. I will do an exception here and read it. It's footnote 7. Including linguistics. This is from the linguist Katz, pretty famous. The ability of speakers to transmit their thoughts and ideas to one another through the vehicle of articulated speech sounds presupposes that each speaker has mastered a common system of rules within which each well-formed utterance receives a fixed semantic interpretation. And there is a comment here by Searle, actually, very good one. The common fantasy that is here elevated into linguistic theory is met in a mother's notion that her baby struggles and finally succeeds in giving expression in language to its thoughts. The same idea recurs in the commonly held view that dogs talk to another in dog language, carrying on an exchange of dog ideas. One example of this, and hence an illustration of the pervasiveness of the metaphysical picture in question, is provided by some recent work in animal psychology. There, a researcher has motivated his attempts to teach chimpanzees to talk by claiming that they had that when they master speech, they will be able to express thoughts that they had all along. And in teaching these animals to manipulate in certain rudimentary ways plastic cards in return for tidbits, he believes that he is thereby linking up these words with their concepts. Words express thoughts. Therefore, understanding language requires the having of thoughts. Understanding requires thoughts. Two, the Buddhist position. Those practicing Zen Buddhism are admonished to carry on the daily activities, whatever they may be, in a state that is free of all thoughts. Normal daily activities will naturally include the exchange of information, the giving and receiving of requests, and so on. The advanced Zen practitioner or Zen master does what he has as a beginner was admonished to do. He lives free of thought. At the same time, he, like anyone else, will understand information presented to him, will understand and respond correctly to questions and requests, and so on. Thus, Buddhism, contrary to the common view, postulates the possibility of understanding in the absence of thought. The postulate is fundamental in Mahayana Buddhism. The Diamond Sutra states that one who starts out in the way of the Bodhisattva should form the following thought of enlightenment. As many beings as there are in the universe of beings. All these I must lead to nirvana, into that realm of nirvana which leaves nothing behind. And yet, although innumerable beings have thus been led to nirvana, no being at all has been led to nirvana. This apparent contradiction is elaborated upon as follows. And why? This apparent contradiction is elaborated upon as follows. And why? If in a bodhisattva the notion of being should take place, he could not be called a body being. He is not to be called a body being in whom the notion of a self or of a being should take place, or the notion of a living soul or of a person. What is envisaged here is that a person who lives in the Buddha's way does so free of thoughts of himself or of others. He acts so as to help others to achieve the Buddha's way, but does so without the conceptions of self and others, without the conception of helping others. Not only are these conceptions absent, as the text states, but as we must extrapolate, all conceptions are absent. For it would serve no purpose to have freed oneself of the conceptions of self and others, and yet be left with the conceptions of chairs, tables, pens, numbers, trees, and so on. The mind of the Bodhisattva must be free of all concepts, since the Bodhisattva will be engaged in helping others, and since this will require his understanding their questions, requests, and so on, we again reach the conclusion that for Buddhism, understanding is possible without thought. Three, Wittgenstein's view. Practice. Consider the example of learning color words. It is necessary at some point in a learner's mastery of understanding of such commands as fetch a red flower, for him to achieve understanding, in part by learning to associate the word red with a thought. In this case, the thought of red or an image or mental representation of red. In such a case, do thoughts or images or other mental phenomena play a necessary role of understanding? If images or thoughts do have a role in understanding, we can replace them by external representations of themselves. For example, if the image of red plays a role in understanding, we can conceive that instead of forming this image, people paint a red patch and then look at it. The externalized image, the painted red patch, should be able to do whatever job the image or thought is supposed to do in furthering or achieving understanding. For the painted patch is just as vivid, if not more so, than the image, or just as faithful, if not more so, a copy of redness as the image. But the externalized image is incapable of giving life or meaning to the mere words. And if this is so, then by the above consideration, neither can images or thoughts give life or meaning to words. Hence, thoughts cannot be necessary for understanding. And it is clear that the externalized thoughts cannot give words life, as follows. Instead of forming images, we suppose people, upon hearing a command, paint the appropriate picture and then look at them. We give someone a command: fetch a red flower. He paints what? Perhaps a picture of a red flower and the picture or series of picture of a person fetching. Now, instead of saying fetch a red flower and having him paint and then look at what he has painted, the externalization of his having the thoughts that allegedly allow him to understand the command. We could have simply handed him a painting like the one he had himself produced. But what is the advantage of this painting over the dead words? Unless he has been trained or taught how to act when given such a painting, he will not know what to do with it. For it is obvious on reflection that any picture could be interpreted in a number of different ways. For example, a picture or picture series commanding one to fetch a red flower could be interpreted as commanding one to return a red flower to such and such a place. We, as it were, read the picture backwards. Similarly, a pointing finger could be read as pointing in the opposite direction to that towards which we would normally take it to be pointing. Any training that would allow a person to follow the command represented by painting could equally well, with modifications, have enabled him to respond directly to the verbal command, fetch a red flower. The externalized image, then, cannot give life to the mere words of the command. It is equally clear that whatever job the image could have done for the understanding, the externalized image could do as well or better. If the image could have given life to the words, then so too could the externalized image have given the words life. Therefore, the image or thought form cannot give life to the words, and therefore cannot be required for understanding. As Wittgenstein notes, once we think of the possibility of externalizing images, their supposed efficacy for understanding vanishes. Images were only thought to have this efficacy because of their location in the mind, which made them vague and mysterious enough to fulfill the magical job of providing understanding. They lose their magic when translated into mundane pictures or other objects in space. If we follow Wittgenstein's train of thought further, we arrive at his notion of practice. Understanding commands involving color words, we are inclined to think, requires at some stage in the process of learning, understanding, and coming to act correctly on commands, the formation in the mind of ideas or images. Following the technique of externalization, we can imagine the following case. A person is taught to understand commands involving color words by being taught to use a chart. The chart contains a list of color words and correlated with this list a row of color patches. Thus, there's a red color patch beside the word red, a blue patch beside the word blue, and so on. When given a command, the person finds the color word involved, looks across the color patch, and then follows out the command. That is the command, fetch something red. The color chart here replaces ideas or images of the various colors. There's no need to form the images, since one simply looks on the chart for the appropriate color patch. This chart can be read in various ways. For example, we can imagine a language in which color words are read differently on alternate days. On the first day, the chart is read according to the schema 3 parallel arrows. On the second day, it is read according to the schema 3 arrows crossed. So the people who master the chart and the corresponding language must also learn to read it in the above ways on alternate days. They must learn to vary their interpretations of the chart. On a given day, how do they know which way to read the chart? Presumably by means of an idea or image, that is, by forming images of one or another of the above arrow schemas. To save the people the trouble of forming these arrows, we could simply make the charts with these arrow images appended, and on alternate days give them the appropriate one of the two thus enlarged charts. And I put the time for quotation here. So charts was the very last word of 1801. There are quite some interesting things here. Some excellent quotes, I would say. So far, one of the best collections of making it understandable. What is the picture? The linguistic idea on, let's see here, what page was that? Page 385. The idea that dogs are conveying to each other dog ideas. You see in the footnote. And I think this is shared by everyone. in the Western Hemisphere. And I made a little mark here. This is like the 15th line from the beginning of the same page. How this person works with chimpanzees. It's the end of the first paragraph. He is using tidbits to encourage them to connect plastic cards. So thereby he will be linking up these words for the plastic cards with their concepts. So somehow the chimpanzees already have concepts. They already have them. It reminds me of the movie The Planet of the Monkeys. The monkeys gain an ability to speak, and therefore they take over the world. But they already have concepts, somehow. And this is also the viewpoint of, I'd say, the absolute majority of linguists. Intention, which is often a common word, or meaning, I think, in everyday parlance. Meaning is always there. No one has to participate or have any culture, history, any relations to doings, interactions, intentions. It's an absolutely static worldview. We are just theater goers to our own reality. No wonder that some philosophers, well, most philosophers and even some scientists proclaim that there to be a transcendental world somewhere beyond, like Hugh Everett and others. And even the idea that we can see the universe from the outside of everything that is human beings, our language, our rich history, thinking itself can somehow be apart from our practices, our doings. It simply doesn't make any sense at all. Chimpanzees do not have thoughts inside their small skulls. It's not because of their lack of two proper legs and a speaking apparatus. It is not because the chimpanzees or the gorillas or whatever animal there is doesn't have a capacity for vocal cords. No. They simply do not have the practice of language. And they will never ever get it. No matter how much tidbits, candies, cookies you give them. The same goes for dolphins or whatever animal you would like to endow with this transcendental feature of thinking in itself without any connection to anything. We go to the next page. Second paragraph, and we can go down to the 8th line. For it would serve no purpose to have freed oneself of the conceptions of self and others, and yet be left with the conceptions of chairs, tables, pens, numbers, trees, and so on. Well, here we have the Saussurean problem treated in a Buddhist way or Eastern way. When we spoke earlier, many lectures ago, about Ashishtalela, it was some similarities. Chairs do not make any sense by themselves, like Platonic chairs. Chairs are things that you sit on. Your ability to understand what a chair is, it's deeply connected to sitting on the chair. A chimpanzee cannot sit on a chair. It's even nonsensical to say both chimpanzee A and human being B see the same chair. It's nonsensical. It's deeply connected to the procedure of sitting on it. A chair is not an object per se, fleeing about in our reality without any connections to our doing. It wouldn't be a chair if it wasn't 100% our doings. There is no four-handed chair, despite the ideas of Plato. Should we be extra hard against Plato? It's not even his ideas. It's not even his philosophy. He is ruled by the picture, the idea that thoughts can live in a vacuum, that they can reside in this liquid that is probably inside the brain in the vat. I can imagine the vat is filled with some wondrous liquid, maybe coffee liqueur or something other enticing, champagne, why not? No, all those things are deeply connected. They are all surhanden. So the Platonic view is not his own, and it doesn't even make any sense to himself. He doesn't understand what he's saying. No wonder that Plato at old age got quite bitter and absolutely disappointed. I like the next paragraph as well. It's a bit of an oversimplification, but sometimes that could be good as well. Wittgenstein view practice. And color words is especially connected to doing the colors. There's no chance of you learning colors if you don't have the colors. Something that was firstly proved by Oliver Sacks, the British neurologist, visiting some inhabitants on a Pacific island where everybody has a specific sort of color blindness. They did not interact with the colors, they didn't treat them differently, and therefore there weren't different colors. If we were uncivilized and had no idea what a chair was, we couldn't tell a chair apart from a table. We couldn't see it. We could see some, but only a little bit. Our vision, our senses are not disjunct from reality. A horrid thought, but it's wrong. We go to the next page. And we go all the way down to the third paragraph, almost to the end, 6 or 5 lines from the bottom of the third paragraph. Now we're down to the fourth paragraph, the third, a bit up. There we have it, yeah. And we have a pointing finger here. In different cultures, pointing means different things. Of course, it doesn't mean an object in at least maybe 100 languages. It doesn't have objects. One alternative is what I'm pointing to, anything except for what I'm pointing to. Or I'm pointing to the surface of what I'm pointing to. There are all these similarities. Actually, European languages are quite unique in that it points to something that is called a noun. That is the exception among the languages. Now you can see the misunderstanding of an ostensive definition by pointing is coming from the idea of thoughts hanging in the air. And the idea next taken by the author is let's externalize the image as we see in the last paragraph. So to speak, we have separable thoughts in our heads, inside our heads, which is the common view. I kid you not. And the idea that was proposed by the linguist, the philosopher, and psychologists, that inside our skulls, somewhere deeply hidden, actually the same view as a brain in the vat, the Putnamian horror movie, if you like. That could be externalized somehow. So I could put my thoughts into words in a literal way. That cannot be happening. We need to do color charts and we need to do language. It's a piece of act. If the image could have given life to the words, then so too could the externalized image have given the words life. It could start either end, and it doesn't really matter. They are together and non-separable, I would say. And you can compare, and I think this is something I came up with while reading this yesterday. Augustine and all the others, we are unaware because of our writing system, going from the left to the right, that when you see pictures, they could actually be read from the right to the left. we are unaware that there is a picture, so to speak, ruling our understanding. But in sharp contrast to the picture of life left to right, this picture of the idea that we are human beings disjunct from the world, floating above it or underneath it, having no place here, and all the relations are unnecessary for thinking to exist, is very harmful. It rids our words of the proper meaning. It makes language poorer. And now most definitely it's time for you, Kalle, to enter the sea. Most welcome.
Thank you. And I will soon propose something heretical, so I apologize in advance. Let's see. This is Philosophy and Investigations, a PDF version. Let me see, this is important to show you something. This is a familiar quote, but yes, this is the famous quotation. Let me see, this is paragraph, it's page 255. Bigger, so this is most familiar to Hans, but let us repeat it because it's so important for our discussion today. If a lion could talk, we could not understand him. If a lion could talk, we could not understand him.
Indeed.
So now with this, let me return to page 3 that you were also discussing. So it's page 3 in the PDF version. It's 385 in the printout, 385. So it was about the dog language and so forth. And I think it's worthwhile to return because it's, as you said, Hans, so a common misconception shared by everyone, I think, except for Wittgenstein and a few others.
Yes, indeed, yeah, very much.
So this is it was the example was with chimpanzee or a dog, or we could also use lion as example, as we had in the Wittgenstein quotation. And Wittgenstein says it clearly that even if lion could talk, we would not understand him. So a dog language is not possible. We cannot speak about dog talk, or we would not understand dogs even if they could speak.
No.
And I would like to show you something funny, because I think some humor can help to Banksy, the famous artist Banksy.
Oh yeah.
Banksy and John Travolta. This is the famous image, Pulp Fiction, excuse me, where they're holding a banana. Let me see if I can.
Yeah.
If I can get up a nice picture. Wiki image. Let me see. Yes, here. Pulp Fiction Banksy. So this is the image. So what is my point here?
It's quite funny.
Yes. So those who so it's obvious that John Travolta is holding the banana like a weapon.
Yeah.
But let's imagine now that okay, we still have the same image, but this time we have, say, apes or a lion looking at this image. Would they understand it?
Yeah. Very good, Kalle. No, we wouldn't.
Yes, so I think I cannot put myself in the how ape thinks, but the ape would say, here is a banana to you. They would go to John Travolta. They don't really get the point of here is a threat. They could shoot us and kill us with this banana weapon.
It's excellent, Kalle. Wow, very good. And you see, what you mean here is the relations, that all complexity, the need to see the movie Pulp Fiction, or at least know that a gun is held in your right hand and pointing, Augustinian pointing here, ostensive definition. Just fantastic.
Yeah, yes, and to about lacking concepts, that apes and animals lack concepts, and they also lack history. And that is the idea. So we think, or people normally think that meaning exists without history.
Yeah.
As you said, Hans, it's static. That is, so meanings would hang somewhere there without history. And you said, Hans, something important. You need, or Wittgenstein says like this, animals do not have the practice of language. Animals do not have the practice of language, including in language you have etymology, concepts, and so forth.
Oh yeah, of course.
And I think this obstacle is not possible for animals to surpass. That can animals, let's say that somebody says that animals can actually learn to practice the language, human language. But I think it would be like saying that if I practice, I can with practice acquire a tail or a wing, like of a bird.
Yeah.
So if you think about this quotation by Wittgenstein, if a lion could talk, we could not understand him. I think this phrase itself has very important consequences. It is in this very simple sentence, it makes, I think, evolution impossible. Or because language is something that you have to practice, and you cannot practice, you cannot learn to practice a language. It's like, as I told you, I would practice to get a tail.
Yeah. No.
But I'm open for, so to say, or do you think that animals could acquire this practice of language, or is it impossible?
No, my personal view here is no. I would say they could have something. There wouldn't be a language. Something they could have. Dogs bark and they can tell when they are hungry to each other and so forth. So they have something, but they can't have language. No, they could never have.
So we could say that, okay, like animals, they have similar needs to ours, like they need to pee and they need to eat.
Yes.
But it's a different life, but completely, it's very superficially similar.
Yes, very good. Very good. Yeah, definitely. It's extreme oversimplification. We are sharing life words. I think Wittgenstein say something that we share life words. And as you mentioned, hunger, thirst, the need for safety, somewhere to sleep. But that is very, very far from having a complete language, which is a gazillion things. It's all the connections we have in between human beings. It also all the histories, all the future, is all the literature. It's too much. It's concepts like knowledge. How do you even explain that? You can't explain it. You can't learn it if you don't have it.
Yes, absolutely, and yes, I think the also the image of box is important. So if you yes, so people think that animals work. So it's like a Brennavat that the animals somewhere there. I don't know. They isolated completely still from the human life world.
But we are opposing a very common view here. You are aware of that. This is very
Heretical.
Most people think that animals have words, and it's also a matter of time until we understand those words. And all of a sudden, the dog would say, "Oh, I prefer to have my breakfast outside, to I can enjoy my sunshine and have a look at the lake."
Yes, yes. So absolutely, absolutely. And some practices, I believe, are impossible to learn, or and as Wittgenstein says that we have language games, and some games can be impossible to learn. Can we say that animals, the human language game is impossible for them to learn? Is it possible to say something like that?
Yeah, it's only possible for us humans, and if an animal is having a completely different life world, it looks different, it acts different, everything is different. It's a myriad of things that are different. Of course, we look at Walt Disney, all the animals can talk. Doesn't matter if it's a mouse or a duck.
Absolutely.
Like, it could never happen. We wouldn't understand them if they were to talk. We have a different life world altogether.
Or perhaps we should leave it there, Hans, with this
Well,
language.
thank you very much, Kalle. I really loved your Banksy thing. Well thought up. A bit of humor invigorates everything, I would say. And I think humor is necessary too. And I never saw this one before. I never saw it. It's John Travolta and Samuel L. Jackson. It's great. It's just great. Thank you very much for that, Kalle.
Thank you.
Thank you everyone for listening in. Have a very pleasant morning, day, afternoon, or night, wherever you are. Bye bye for now.